Welcome back to the Crypto Strategist, the channel where we cut through the noise and give you the real picture on what is happening in the world of crypto. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now because what we are about to cover today is one of those updates that you genuinely cannot afford to miss. Tom Lee just said something about XRP and the Clarity Act that most people in this space completely glossed over, and by the time we are done here today, you are going to understand exactly why that matters for every single person who has been holding a position in this market. This is not hype. This is not speculation dressed up as analysis. This is a breakdown of real evidence, real timelines, and real people in real rooms making decisions that are going to shape what happens to digital assets in America over the next several weeks. So stay with me because this one goes deep. Let us start with the name everyone is talking about right now. Tom Lee is not someone who throws predictions around carelessly. If you have followed financial markets for any serious length of time, you already know who he is. He is the co-founder of Fundstrat Global Advisors, one of the most respected macro research firms on Wall Street. And he has been one of the few voices in traditional finance who has consistently engaged with the crypto space on a substantive level rather than dismissing it or treating it like a sideshow. When Tom Lee says something specific about a piece of legislation and its direct connection to XRP's market trajectory, that is not a retail influencer pumping a coin. That is a Wall Street veteran with decades of institutional credibility drawing a line between policy and price. And what he revealed this week deserves your full attention. Here is the core of what Tom Lee identified. The Clarity Act, which has been working its way through Congress for longer than most people would like to admit, is now entering a window that he described as genuinely critical. Not critical in the vague way that every analyst says something is critical when they want views. Critical in the specific sense that the next 4 weeks represent a closing window for legislative action before the August congressional recess shuts everything down until the fall. Tom Lee pointed out that the combination of factors currently aligned around this bill, the bipartisan engagement, the daily member-level meetings, the institutional money already moving in anticipation, and the hard August 7th deadline creates a pressure environment that Washington has rarely seen around a single piece of financial legislation. And XRP, he argued, sits directly at the center of that story. Now, to understand why XRP specifically is positioned the way it is, you have to understand what the Clarity Act actually does. This is not a simple piece of legislation. It is a comprehensive framework that determines how digital assets are legally classified in the United States, which federal regulators have jurisdiction over which categories of assets, what disclosure requirements apply to companies that issue or trade those assets, and how the existing financial system has to adapt its infrastructure to work alongside digital asset markets. For years, the lack of that framework has been the single biggest anchor on institutional adoption. Big money does not move into markets where the legal ground rules are unclear. That is not caution. That is fiduciary responsibility. And XRP has been sitting inside that legal ambiguity longer than almost any other major digital asset. What makes Tom Lee's analysis different from what you typically hear about XRP is that he is not just pointing at price charts and drawing lines. He is connecting the legislative calendar to the institutional behavior that the data already shows is happening right now underneath the surface. And here is a number that should stop you cold. According to recent tracking of institutional investor behavior, 3/4 of large financial institutions that already have exposure to digital assets are planning to increase that exposure significantly. That alone would be a remarkable data point, but the number that sits right next to it is the one that changes the entire picture. 95% of large financial institutions that currently hold zero digital asset exposure are planning to enter the market for the first time this year, not someday, this year. The institutions have already made their decisions internally. They are waiting for the regulatory signal. And that signal, if it comes through the Clarity Act. This is the mechanism Tom Lee is pointing at when he talks about XRP's biggest Clarity Act surprise. The surprise is not that the bill exists. The surprise is how close it actually is right now compared to where the public conversation suggests it is. Kristen Smith, the former CEO of the Blockchain Association and one of the most well-connected people in the entire digital asset policy world, confirmed publicly this week that daily in-person meetings are happening right now between Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, the White House, and the crypto industry. Daily, in person, at the member level. Those last 3 words are the most important part of that sentence, and we are going to spend a moment on them because they change everything about how you should read this situation. When policy discussions happen in Washington at the staff level, that is routine. Staffers meet constantly, they exchange documents, they coordinate language, they relay positions back to their bosses. That is the normal machinery of legislation, and it happens on hundreds of issues simultaneously across Capitol Hill every single day. But when senators themselves are showing up to daily face-to-face meetings on a single piece of legislation, that is a completely different signal. These are people managing dozens of simultaneous national priorities: budget negotiations, military authorization, judicial confirmations, constituent work that never stops. A sitting senator's schedule is one of the most jealously guarded resources in Washington. When they are personally investing that time every single day in one bill, they are telling you something with their actions that no press release ever will. They believe this is going somewhere, and they intend to be the ones who get it there. Tom Lee specifically called out what he sees as the underappreciated element of this story, which is the bipartisan quality of the engagement. The names Kristen Smith cited as active participants on both sides of the aisle include Senator Bernie Moreno, Senator Lummis, and Senator Gillibrand, among others. In the current political environment in Washington, genuine bipartisan cooperation on anything is rare enough to be noteworthy. On financial legislation that touches on digital assets, technology infrastructure, and regulatory jurisdiction across multiple federal agencies, it is extraordinary. Tom Lee's argument is that the market has not fully priced in what that bipartisan commitment actually means for the bill's probability of passage. The public narrative around the Clarity Act still carries the skepticism that built up over years of delays. The private reality inside those meeting rooms is something significantly more advanced than that narrative reflects. Let us talk about the three specific issues that remain between the Clarity Act and the President's desk, because Tom Lee addressed each of them and his framing is worth understanding carefully. The first is illicit finance, specifically what is referred to as Section 604 of the bill. This section deals with how the regulatory framework handles financial crime, money laundering, terrorist financing, and sanctions evasion involving digital assets. For some legislators and their constituents, the concern is genuine and legitimate. Does giving legal clarity to digital asset markets also create more cover for criminal actors to operate inside a legitimized structure? It is a reasonable question, and it deserves a serious answer. The testimony that has been delivered directly on Capitol Hill answers it with documented evidence that most people following this space have not seen presented this clearly. The evidence on the law enforcement question is frankly stunning when you see the numbers together. Working alongside blockchain analytics companies through the kind of public-private partnerships the Clarity Act is specifically designed to expand, law enforcement agencies have frozen over $300 million in Iranian-controlled funds through Tether's freeze mechanism alone. Not after weeks of subpoenas, not through the slow, multi-jurisdictional process of traditional banking investigations. The funds were frozen with a speed and precision that the conventional financial system cannot come close to matching. And that is not even the headline number. This year alone, law enforcement has seized over $1 billion in cryptocurrency linked to Iran. $1 billion identified, traced, and seized from a state actor using digital assets to move sanctioned money. Through the traditional banking system, that kind of investigation would have taken years and required court proceedings across multiple jurisdictions just to freeze the funds. The North Korea dimension of this argument makes the same case from a different angle, and Tom Lee flagged it as particularly important for understanding why Section 604 concerns can be resolved. Law enforcement has been able to identify and directly trace funds linked to North Korea's nuclear weapons program specifically because those transactions occurred on a public blockchain, which is a permanent, transparent, and fully auditable ledger. You simply cannot do that with cash. Cash is anonymous, portable, and leaves no traceable record once it moves across borders. The transparency that critics once cited as a risk for digital assets turns out to be law enforcement's most powerful investigative tool. The argument being made inside those congressional meetings is direct. If the United States needs the tools to go after bad actors in this new era of digital finance, those tools are built into the framework the Clarity Act establishes. Opposing the framework means voting to leave those law enforcement capabilities permanently underdeveloped. The second outstanding issue is DBRCA. And while the technical details get complicated quickly, the core of the debate centers on how crypto platforms that hold user funds should be required to handle any interest or returns generated from those assets. Should those earnings be passed back to the users whose funds generated them? That question has real implications for how crypto businesses structure their operations and how they interact with existing banking law. It was a genuine friction point in earlier rounds of negotiation, but the consistent pattern throughout this bill's entire journey has been that when a specific roadblock appeared, the negotiators at the table found creative ways to address it and keep the process moving forward. Tom Lee's reading of the current moment is that this pattern is holding in the live negotiations happening right now. The third issue is ethics, and while it gets less analytical attention than the financial and regulatory questions, it carries political weight that the negotiators on both sides are taking seriously. The ethics concerns relate to how legislators and their staff members interact with the digital asset industry during the legislative process itself. In an environment where the public's trust in government institutions is already strained, the optics of that relationship matter enormously to senators who are going to have to defend their votes to constituents. The negotiators inside those daily meetings are fully aware of this dimension and are working to address it in a way that does not derail the broader framework. Tom Lee's assessment is that none of the three remaining issues is a deal-breaker in the current environment. Each one is a negotiation, and the people currently doing the negotiating have demonstrated over the course of this entire process that they know how to navigate. Here is the stablecoin dimension of this story that deserves far more attention than it currently gets in the mainstream coverage of the Clarity Act debate. And Tom Lee was explicit about why it connects directly to the XRP question. 98% of all stablecoins currently in circulation are backed by the US dollar. In countries like Venezuela and Argentina, where local currencies have been destroyed by years of hyperinflation and where a lifetime of savings can lose its purchasing power in months, people are accessing US dollar-backed stablecoins as a genuine financial lifeline. They are not speculating on price movements. They are protecting whatever they have managed to preserve. And through that mechanism, the US dollar's reserve currency influence is being extended through blockchain infrastructure into populations that would otherwise have no meaningful access to dollar-denominated savings at all. That is a geopolitical story as much as it is a financial one. The competition for that territory is already active and intensifying. The BRICS coalition and China are actively pushing a digital yuan into Africa and other developing economies. The contest for reserve currency influence in the digital era is not happening only through central bank agreements and sovereign debt structures. It is happening at the level of which digital currency standard billions of people in developing economies adopt as their practical savings vehicle day to day. Right now, the United States holds a dominant position in that race. 98% is a dominant position. The Clarity Act, by providing the regulatory framework that allows US dollar-backed digital assets to operate with legal clarity and institutional support, is a direct instrument of that geopolitical competition. Tom Lee's biggest Clarity Act surprise, when you pull it all the way back to the widest frame, is this. The bill that the market has been treating as a delayed domestic regulatory matter is actually one of the most consequential pieces of American financial and geopolitical strategy in a generation. And XRP, as a digital asset built for institutional cross-border value transfer, sits precisely at the intersection of everything that bill is designed to enable. The next 4 weeks will tell us whether the people in those daily meetings can finish what they started. But everything Tom Lee laid out this week says the conditions for a yes vote have never looked more real than they do right now.